The second time just for Richard. Dean Skelos, obviously just the latest Albany leader facing indictment. Where are we now, and how did we get to this point where public confidence is so low in the state's capital? Now, this political headline said it all for many. Congratulations, New York. You're #1 in corruption. Well, earlier today, I spoke to the writer of that article, Alan Greenblatt. He covers politics for Governing. You know, we do this so often. Every night we cover this issue. It's seemingly a broken record. And we also have the benefit of pulling from New Jersey as well when it comes to corruptions. However, you put in context a number that I didn't even realize. Skelos is the 5th straight Senate Majority Leader that has faced indictment in Albany. It's unbelievable, and obviously when you do the math and you go across the legislature, I should say, we've had just in the last 5 years, more than a couple dozen legislators who've also either resigned and disgraced or faced indictment themselves. Talk about a rogues gallery here. There's almost an expectedness from the general public that we're going to get one headline or another like this.
Well, that's right. And don't forget, this comes just 3 months after Shelley Silver was indicted as well. So I don't think there's been another state that's had the 2 top leaders in both chambers face criminal charges in the same year. I've never heard of that happening anywhere else. And I think you raised something that's part of the issue, which is kind of an expectation of a pay-to-play culture, a corrupt culture in Albany. And that's why you have these charges being brought by the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, who is not part of that political culture and comes at it with fresh eyes and fresh outrage, I think.
But Alan, one of the things you did in your piece, more than just chronicling the bad behavior or alleged bad behavior, is getting to the root as to why. Explain the self-interest and how the system's almost designed for it up there.
Well, New York legislators actually make more money than legislators in most states. I think they make about $80,000 a year, which is a full-time salary for most people. Other places, they do even less. And what ends up happening is there's an expectation that you're allowed to supplement your salary one way or another. And in both these indictments, there's certainly a suggestion that these leaders have looked to the political connections they make as ways of profiting themselves, of directing business to their sons or to their law firm. I mean, of course, these allegations have been proved, but everything becomes conjoined. Politics becomes a way of advancing not just ideas for the state, but advancing one's own interests and filling one's own pocket.
Before Richard Brodsky goes nuts in a second when I bring him into the conversation, this isn't just the cottage industry in New York. As you articulate in your article, forget about going across the border in New Jersey. You go to places like Massachusetts, you go to Illinois, and we can go down the list here. Why is this so systemic in state politics?
All of these politicians, and usually, particularly the people in leadership, are in totally safe districts. There are no foxes watching them in the henhouse, if I can mangle that metaphor. They don't get much media scrutiny. They don't have political opposition. And in New York, you've had Democrats controlling the assembly for years and years. Republicans, with just a little blip recently, have had the Senate for years. So the party machines are still in place in New York. It used to be that the machines would bring home the bacon for constituents. Now that's sort of cut off. There's still the party machines in place in terms of control, but they don't answer so much to their constituents by and large. And so this just gives them free license to pursue their own game.
You do have a line in your piece here where the expression good government groups call New York, which is Citizens United on steroids. I know the general public obviously has a pretty good idea of what's going on, but they don't understand just how literally cash can change hands from corporations directly to candidates. Explain that.
Yeah, in a lot of places, you cannot give money directly as a corporation, as a business. Individuals have to give the money, and of course, executives from companies give a lot of money. Lobbyists represent companies give a lot of money. But in New York, LLCs in particular can give money directly. Corporations are limited to $5,000 a year to a candidate, and LLCs, which are law firms or anybody can set one up, and often these are set up just as conduits for political money. They could give $60,000, and oftentimes developers, real estate folks in particular, will set up multiple LLCs just to be able to funnel lots of money to their friends in the legislature.
One point in the piece you say, it's not crazy to these guys that you'll hit up a lobbyist for a campaign donation the day before that lobbyist appears before lawmakers petitioning whatever issue it is. That's considered normal and not shocking behavior when you would think, my God, talk about a conflict of interest.
Right. If you take money from somebody and they come around and ask for a favor, I mean, of course, you're going to be inclined to help them out. I mean, this is what makes people cynical of politics. And in Albany, it happens all the time. I mean, back in the 80s, they'd have a handful of fundraisers during the session in Albany, which are going to be attended pretty much only by lobbyists. It's not going to be their constituents from their districts. And these Albany fundraisers now take place at a rate of about 200 a year, or 200 per session. They're every night. Their people are looking for money.
Finally, with all the systemic issues, one name really has not only put fear into Albany, but I think has at least given us the best chance for some material change, and that's Preet Bharara. It can't be exaggerated, Ken and Alan, how much people are scared to death of this guy up in Albany.
Well, maybe it can be exaggerated. I mean, you read the criminal charges against Dean Skelos and his son, and they talk about the possibility of being bugged by the U.S. attorney, and yet they keep talking. But it's definitely true.
That could also be that they're idiots. You know, that also could be another reason for it, you know?
Well, I think people just don't believe it'll happen to them, you know. But at any rate, you're right that everybody's watching their back, and you do have this U.S. attorney who's clearly examining the situation very carefully. And this is what it takes usually. It's very rare that these cases are brought by a district attorney or an attorney general. It's almost always a federal prosecutor who's not part of the local political culture, who is not under the same kind of pressures and can lead these kind of investigations.
Well, again, even for folks who cover this, this was a great piece that Alan wrote here, and talks about the ignominious title of being the most corrupt state, at least in the eyes of many. Alan Greenblatt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Richard, we joke around, but obviously, while you certainly don't condone the criminality of it, you still always defend the institution. That.
Wait a minute, I'm rethinking my position.
Okay, but my point is, we would have the Pedro Espadas of the world, just bad actors doing bad things, and to Dominic's point, these guys were on the make from jump. But if you look at Skelos and Silver, forget that they're in leadership, smart guys who knew better, right? And if you believe the indictments for this conversation, if you believe the indictments on their face, what happens where they get to a point where they think this is how you do business?
Assuming that the cases are proven, what you have is a situation where people got legalistic about ethical issues and thought if they stayed just on the side of the legal line that there wasn't going to be an ethical or a political problem. Well, they were wrong about that. They might even have been wrong about staying on the right side of the legal line. If I have a position left after all of this mess, it's that the thievery is awful, has to stop and has to be punished. But the big corruption, and you heard it in this last interview, these things they keep getting mixed as though they're the same thing, and they're not. The thievery, people need to be tried, if found guilty, punished, and it needs to stop. The hundreds of millions, not the 20,000 here and 20,000 there, that goes in and out of campaign coffers for the same purposes. Everybody goes, especially if I can get a little partisan here. The Republicans won't close the LLC loophole.
There's a difference, which is that you can make what I think is very convoluted, but still make an argument that the legal campaign donations are at least leading towards a policy decision that they're hoping to influence, but that the person who's receiving the money or the largesse might actually agree with. If it's, I want to change this rule, and the money's coming to me from people who support changing the rule, as opposed to what we're hearing from Skelos and Silver, which seems like it's just for personal gain.
But you know what, Andrew, the part, and Bill, you and Dom, you've covered it, you've seen it. The part that I took from this conversation, and I suggest people read the article that our last guest authored, it's deemed acceptable when you get too close that the same lobbyists who the following day are going to be making an appeal for whatever the particular issue or project is, some lawmakers, feel infinitely comfortable, and it's legal, for them to hit them up for contributions, political contributions, the night before at a cocktail party, while they are going before the state for business trying to secure contracts. And I know if you talk to somebody, they'd be like, yeah, what's wrong with that? I think what happens is for some, the qualifications I'm doing here, that it's just the culture of permissiveness.
No, you were onto something. It's not a culture of permissiveness. It's a system of campaign finance. You were absolutely right. What's the difference between Dean Skelos or anybody calling up and saying, send $20,000 to my son, or calling the same guy up and saying, send $20,000 to my housekeeping account?
It starts to seem normal.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that Dean Skelos thinks he's innocent. He thinks that like New Yorkers do jaywalking, like this is just what people do, and then Preet's coming down and suddenly enforcing the jaywalking laws.
It would have been a good contract anyway, I'm sure you would have said, right?
It is a bubble. There is a bubble in Albany where this stuff starts to seem normal. It's like, get that one a job, move that resume here, get that place, that person. And at some point, people cross the line, and sometimes they know it, and I think sometimes they don't.
And Don, the one thing we get is, forget the party, it almost doesn't matter, okay? If you're one of the three guys in the room, there's a disincentive to change the system.
No.
The way that it is set up right now, with so much consolidated power, who gets on the committees, what gets to the floor, why would you want to change a system that works for you?
Preach, Brother Richard.
But you agree,
Preach.
right?
She's wrong.
Of course, you are 1,000%
now I got two of
correct.
them.
You are 1,000% correct. For example, why won't they come up with tougher laws as it relates to campaign donations and so on, and in terms of how they do business in Albany? The reason why they won't come up with more disclosure laws is because, I don't want to generalize, but to a degree, the crooks are watching the store.
Okay, that's not what he said. He said they're sheep. He didn't say they were thieves.
Okay, sheep, crooks. I listen to this side that, and with all due respect, Bill.
Whenever he says that, here it comes.
It's coming.
No respect at all.
They just blur the line a little bit. A crook is a crook. You know, if I say to you, give my son $30,000, and all of a sudden you get a contract, we both know that's illegal.
This is preaching again. Is there a room?
It is preaching, Brother Brodsky.
Is there any room for reason
preaching.
here?
Well, can I get an
Is there room for
amen? Can I get an amen?
You're definitely not going to get an amen here.
Look, the fact of the matter is that the three men in a room fiction. The New York Times says 3 men in a room, terrible. In Washington, they go, what's wrong with those leaders? They can't control their members. You got to have a vision of how you want a democracy to function. And in this day and age, with executives raising $40 million legally,
But Richard,
you
when
got
you
to have
got the
strong
Assembly
legislative-
Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader under indictment, it doesn't make the point that that's necessarily
You're
good,
shifting
that
from sheep to
consolidation.
thief again,
but is that an
and I
indictment
view that as an
Unfortunately, I
unfair.
don't
Is
let
that an
facts get in
indictment
the
of the players, or is that an indictment of 3 men
Well,
in a
Andrew,
room? I'm
for
not
the
so sure
last
that 3
five,
men in a room is the
last
enemy.
five
players.
Senate Majority
No, I
Leaders,
understand that.
they've either been drummed out on their or they've been indicted.
3 men in a room where you carry Stanley Fink and Warren Anderson, and they saved New York in the bankruptcy crisis. No one complained about 3 men.
Let's
in a
bring them
room.
back now.
Well, you can bring Ravitch back,
Okay.
but you can't bring the
Well,
other 3 back.
when we come back, I'll stay in New York, but I'm going to go south. Bill de Blasio, he's taking credit for the drop in crime, and he's traveling the country trying to become the national voice when it comes for progressiveness. But here's my question for the panel. This guy getting a little too big for his britches and a little too big for the job. He is the mayor of New York, after all. Am I the only one who's getting a little tired of this act?